Hey everyone, I wanted to go over the new and exciting news that we got for Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak that's set to release on both the Nintendo Switch and on PC this summer. And today we got some pretty interesting news from director Suzuki, the director for Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Every single week he takes over to Twitter and the official Monster Hunter Rise Twitter accounts and provides us with a little bit of a tiny update regarding the progression of the game. And today in both the Japanese and the North American official Twitter accounts, he basically confirmed that such pieces are coming into the game. On the Japanese post, it basically reads, "I am Suzuki, the director. Monsters are steadily being completed," and that's pretty much it. Nothing necessarily over the top. But in the North American one, it basically reads, "Hello everyone, we have been putting finishing touches on the monsters in the game. Suzuki, the director for Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak," and the image attached is basically the picture that they used originally to tease Bishitan. Now you have to contextualize this a little bit further. Back when the game was basically being revealed, Rise that is, basically they were providing like a little bit of updates and like hand drawings and stuff for like some of the monsters that were gonna be teased in the upcoming trailer. Funny enough, one of the videos that I recorded going over the leaks and stuff like that, right before the picture that they showcased was of this Tengu creature that they were talking about. Like a lot of the leaked information spoke about this Tengu, this weird like mixture of Japanese ancient like story and lore, this type of monster that eventually turned out to be Bishitan. And they originally showcased this one image, you're seeing that on the screen right now, basically saying like, hey, this is the monster that we're going to be teasing heading into the future. And then the following, I think, couple of days, they showcased the trailer revealing, you know, Bishitan and the way he looks in the game. Now what they're using is the same Bishitan drawing, but they're changing the colors completely. So what that basically says is whenever you see a color variant of a monster, basically means such species, or it could actually be a variant. There is that clear distinction, and I don't necessarily think a lot of people understand the differences. Such species are usually a subgrouping of a monster. Basically, like that means that they're established, as in like there's plenty of those type of monster types. But a variant is a rarer individual, is a rarer monster. They're not necessarily all that common. And basically what we're looking at here is either a variant of such species, but I think the more common way to look at it or approach it would be that yes, this is most likely going to be a such species of Bishitan going forward. Now what does that actually tell us? Well, it basically tells us a lot of things. First and foremost, it means that a lot of the monsters that were introduced in Rise are most likely going to be getting such species and or variants, but most likely such species. Why do we say that? Well, first and foremost, a couple of weeks back I went over a developer interview that they did at the beginning of last year, basically 2021 I think, and they spoke about how it wasn't necessarily an interview about Sunbreak, but they spoke a lot about basically like how Iceborne shaped their idea to deal with DLC heading into the future, and it was in reference to how they could approach ultimately Rise. So it wasn't saying like Rise is gonna have the same ideas as Iceborne did DLC wise, but they were basically inferring that going over what they did in Iceborne could basically give them a good project, a good roadmap to be able to handle the Rise DLC. And now that we know Sunbreak is going to come, and they revealed that at the end of last year, we now know that basically if they're already teasing such species and or variants, we know that that is going to be a similar roadmap that we saw in Iceborne. And Iceborne basically saw a whole heck of a lot of such species and variants. If you really look at the roster for that game, the new monsters that were introduced just for that game alone, half of the monsters are basically such species. So I'm going to be going over the full list right now just so you contextualize that a little bit further and realize just how many of those monsters are probably going to be like easily brought over into the game. Fulgor Anjanath, Frostfang Barriath, Seething Basilgeese, Raging Brachydios, Savage Deviljho, Acidic Glavelus, Shrieking Legiana, Ebony Odogaron, Ruiner Nergigante, Nightshade Palomalu, Koro Puke Puke, Furious Rajang, of course Gold and Silver Rathalos and Rathian, Brute Tigrex, Blackwell Valhazak, Scarred Yangaruga, and of course Stygian Sonogre. That is a lot of such species and variants that were just introduced in Iceborne. One of the reasons was because the base game didn't necessarily have such species, so they basically added them into Iceborne. why wouldn't they necessarily do the same thing in Rise when even their own wording just a month back was pretty much saying like, hey, it worked in Iceborne, you know, we're gonna take that into the future. We're now in the future, guys, and basically this is just confirmation that they're gonna continue the same route. If you're looking at just the monster list that I mentioned alone, Fulgor Anjanath is pretty much, I think, guaranteed at this point in time because Anjanath is already in the game. Frostfang Barriath, another one that I think is going to be automatically there. Seething Basil Geese, almost a guarantee. I wouldn't necessarily say it's Savage Devil Joe, but only because Devil Joe is not in the game. But we know Devil Joe is going to obviously get added into the game. He should be added into the game, so I would probably put that one down as an almost guarantee. Koro Puke Puke, that's another one that I think is almost going to be right there. Furious Rajang, of course, Silver Rathalos and Gold Rathian as well. Brute Tigrex, and of course, Viber Toby Kadachi, and even Stygian Sinogre are all pretty good guarantees that we're going to be seeing not just such species for monsters that are already in Rise. That's the key part of the monster list that I just mentioned. Monsters are already in Rise, but also that are like already appeared in Iceborne. And as we have seen when it comes to Rise, a lot of the monsters that are being brought over are monsters that were already in World. So like we're seeing just, I don't want to say a copy and paste job, but we're seeing a lot of that. We went over like the developer notes and stuff like that, how they were speaking about bringing over monsters from World instead of, it was preferred for them, I should rather say, for the developers to bring over monsters from World, which already had higher like definition and higher like skeletal, basically the way the monsters move. All that data was already available because they already did it in World. It was easier for them to do that than to bring over a old monster that simply wasn't available in the past, like, or more recently, I should rather say. So we already know that they're looking over to bring over monsters from World a little bit more than making, you know, a newer version of an old monster right from scratch. So ultimately what this means is pretty exciting news. A lot of padding, a lot of exciting monsters that are going to be being brought over into the game. And I have no real issues with this. This is one of the things that we spoke about originally when we were going over what is Sunbreak going to ultimately end up being. And the idea always was either they're going to introduce a handful of brand new monsters, maybe 5 to 10 at most, that are brand new. Not all of them are going to be there day one. Remember that if they're going to use the same roadmap that they did in Iceborne, then that means a handful of them are there available on day one, and then they're going to start dropping them slowly as part of DLC, just like Iceborne did. That's just kind of the way that worked out. So they'll introduce a couple of new monsters, they'll pad out the game with a bunch of such species, and of course, now this is where I think it really gets interesting, Apex such species. Now that would be a really interesting twist to the entire ordeal because, you know, Apexes, whether you love them or hate them or whatever it is, or, you know, you don't even consider them part of anything special because of deviants in the past, that's fine. But at the end of the day, I think that Apex such species would be really interesting and something that I think a lot of people would end up appreciating if they end up doing it the right way. Ultimately, what that means to me is a brand new armor set for Apexes. Now, I don't know if they're going to willingly commit to that ultimately, or maybe even just make the armor like a color variant of the same original armor, because again, the color wouldn't necessarily matter because you can customize the colors of your armor. That really doesn't really make the difference. What really matters to people is the skills and the skill combinations that you can make, and that's probably one of the things that they're trying to simplify more than anything. I think when people demand more armor sets, one of the things that they don't really grasp is the fact that Capcom has been really pushing for simplification of skills over like the past few games. They're trying to make every single skill a little bit more clearer to understand, trying to like mix some of the weaker ones together just so they can have one simplified skill. And ultimately, I guess this is gonna deviate, and this is just my own speculation, that most likely for like Monster Hunter 6 or World 2 or whatever they end up calling it, they're not going to give us armors with skills. It will most likely be whatever you socket into, whatever gems you put into the armor, that will provide you with the skills. That is my guess, only because ultimately what you're looking for is probably a mixture of everything. You don't necessarily care about what the armor even is because you can make it look like however you want. You can customize it. it's just about basically, because of, again, layered armor. So it doesn't really matter what the armor actually is. It's just about what skills it provides you and like how much defense it has. That's really all you care about. So, and then ultimately you can put anything on top of it and make it look like however you want. They've bastardized the idea of like an armor set looking one way and you having to represent those skills in that way, is what I'm trying to say. Where they're just probably could provide you the option of just socketing skills through gems and like get rid of all that together, and it would just make it easier on you, the player, to just make it look however you want, because you can customize the armor however you want. So that's just my speculation in that regard. But when it comes to regards to subspecies, I think this is not a big surprise, kind of like a no-brainer. I'm pretty happy with it. I think going forward we should be able to start seeing, you know, some of those trailers drop, providing us with information on subspecies. I just hope that they continue to show us new monsters as we heading into the launch of the game, and they don't necessarily just like, hey, we showed you 2 new monsters, now we're going to show you 8 new subspecies, and like they kind of like stop giving us information on new monsters, which ultimately is what people want to see. But that's about all the information that I wanted to go over. If you are brand new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up, and as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.